when you are co-parenting and when you're demonstrating effective emotional maturity, then even your children, right? They begin to sense it. They become more comfortable. They feel more loved, and they're able to sense that piece of love between the parents. I'm Dr. Gary L. White, and welcome to another edition of the Dr. G. L. White Show. Today, we are going to focus on something that's absolutely critical to promoting healthy involvement, and that is understanding the significance of co-parenting. You know, there's a right way and the wrong way to co-parent, and some challenges can result in nightmares for some trying to be involved. When the emotions are high, when there's high parental conflict, all these are factors that can really impact how successful a father can be in his involvement. But when you remove it all out the way and really begin to focus, there's really some strategies and techniques that I think are critical to building successful co-parenting. And so what I'm going to talk about in each of these are, number one, just talk about some signs that you're on track. Some signs that indicate that as a co-parent, you're kind of making some successful advancements in that. Of course, we got to talk about some red flags in each one of these. When the co-parenting becomes a little problematic, which may show up with some issues with how your children are responding. But most importantly, I just want to touch a little bit about just when your co-parenting is really being effective. And most of the time, that's kind of manifested in how your children begin to respond. So let's talk about these 5. Now, the first one, and I think it's really among the most important one, and that is maintain child-centered communication. That's right. When communicating, keep all communication really focused on the child. When you do that, focusing on the child's well-being, focusing on the child's academic performance, when you're doing that, not allowing the communication to go astray, not to begin to talk about issues that's going on in the relationship or how the relationship ended, but keeping the communication focused on the child. This is very important. Now, there's some signs that you're kind of on the good track when you're doing that. First, and I think all of these measures are really sort of like our children's response. So your messages are clear. You're being respectful to the custodial parent. She's being respectful to you. The discussions are really just around the school and extracurricular activities and the schedule of the child. These are some signs when you can have that communication with the custodial parent. You can keep it short and brief, then you know that you're on the right track. You're really making some good strides toward being an effective co-parenting. Again, focusing on exclusively maintaining good communication. Now, there are some red flags. There are some signs that your communication and your co-parenting can become problematic as it relates to the communication. So as I said, the conversations become emotional. You all are bringing up old issues. The unresolved matters from the relationship begin to fall into place. Power and control issues start coming in, and you all start trying to have discussions about matters that are completely out of your control. These are some red flags that in your effort to maintain child-centered communication is kind of becoming problematic. So we want to focus on that. We want to stay in the middle of that healthy form of communication. Another challenge or a red flag that the communication may be going astray is when one parent or both of you began to use the child to be the mediator, began to use the child to communicate, or not realizing it, your child has to then find himself or herself trying to be the mediator between the two parents. These are some serious red flags that there's some work that needs to be done around co-parenting. Now, you know that the co-parenting around the communication is really becoming successful when your child begins to report that she is comfortable, that he is comfortable with being around you, that he is comfortable or she is comfortable about discussing other parent related matters, this is a good sign that the communication between you two is making great progress. And I think this is critical. So we have maintaining the good communication, but equally important, and this one's really critical, establish respectful boundaries between you and the parents, right? So you and the mom have to maintain the respective boundaries in terms of how you communicate. And that means having clear set goals and responsibilities of the child that you both ideally are on the same page as it relates to that. So each parent has their rules in the house and the other parent is kind of respecting that. These are some signs that the boundaries are being kept, the boundaries are being respected, more importantly. And then there's no intention in the middle of this to kind of injure the other person or impede on the other person. So this can really be problematic in terms of trying to have that healthy form of co-parenting. So these boundaries, we set them. They're not in a hostile manner, but ideally when two parents can get together and they can just go over what the rules are when the child is with you or when the child is with her, some good rules around the pickup or who's going to pick up the child or where they're going to pick up the child, good communication around the time the child is going to be picked up, and then both of you honor those rules. So this is critical to respect, understand, and establish the clear boundaries. Now, you will find yourself running into some red flags when you run into a situation where you have someone constantly overstepping the boundaries, whether they are doing it intentionally or unintentionally. That creates hostility. That creates tension, that creates the confusion. And these boundary issues can show up most often in the realm of co-parenting around the pickup and the drop-off. So one of the things that's critical in terms of dealing with this red flag is that you have the clear-cut conversation. And that may be, if it's time for you to pick up the child, communicating once again. Have your checklist of things that need to be done. The boundaries. Listen to me, the boundaries are critical. You know that you are headed in the right path. You know that the boundaries are being respected and it's having a positive impact on your co-parenting. And you know that it's having a positive impact on the children when there are fewer conflicts between you and the parents. There's a demonstration of a mutual respect. And I'm going to tell you, the greatest indicator on all 5 of these is that when we look at and we assess your child's level of comfort, especially with being present between the two of you. Now, the third form of co-parenting, I'm going to call it a successful co-parent, is when the boundaries, like the boundaries, but you all are being consistent in your rules, you're being consistent across the household, and that the children are able to anticipate it and able to understand it. Now, this one is not always easy to do because I've seen situations where a parent has put a child on punishment and then the child goes to the other parent's house, and if they're on punishment and can't go outside, and then the parent says, well, I know the child's with you, but he's on punishment and he shouldn't go outside. And you may actually have a good point if you two discussed this before the issue occurred. Because here's the reality. Our children test boundaries. Our children like to sometimes disrupt routines depending on the age of the child. And so I think it's really critical that you all have a clear understanding of what the rules are that exist between both homes. And more importantly, what you all can agree upon up front. There may be some things that you all don't disagree on, but that's important too, as long as you all communicate it before the visitation begins to occur. Red flags, here we go again. The child begins to play both parents between each other. Now, I'm going to tell you, in the best relationship, even if the both parents were living together, this is something, believe it or not, that children do. They will find the gaps. They will find an opportunity to manipulate the children. So if the parents, so if that happens in healthy relationships, then understand that it's very likely that the children are to try this attempt when you're co-parenting. So effective co-parenting and how you really mitigate that is that you have a communication with the custodial parent. I think it's critical when you get the sense that a curveball is being thrown at you, that you get some clarity around it. Another red flag in this regard is that when there are significant differences between the rules in your house and the rules in the custodial parent's house. So what does that mean? Your rule says the child has to be in by 8. The custodial parent's rule says the child has to be in by 11 o'clock. So if you all are on different pages, then truly what you're going to see is the child is going to tend to want to go with the parent that they can get the most benefit out of. There's nothing malicious about it. It's just something that children do. But when you two have those rules across the household and you two are having good communication or functional communication between those, then the children begin to demonstrate issues of being well adjusted. Their discipline is predictable. They understand the consequences, and it shows up in both homes. So we want to focus on this number 3 and those rules between the two families. If you can pull that off, then you're really on the track of good co-parenting. Now, this next one, number 4, is a little tricky because this one has a lot to do with how the relationship ended. And that is if there's still a great deal of emotions that exist between you, then it's going to show up in the co-parenting. And so I talk about model emotional maturity. Again, model the emotional maturity. That means don't get sucked up in the other person's emotional state. Sometimes you might have a parent, or you might be that parent, that may find himself or herself feeling a type of way, feeling conflictual or combative in any particular type of way. Here, I want to encourage you to demonstrate and model the emotional security. So a best practice, let's just call it a best practice. One of the things that what you want to do is that when there are issues of arguing or a need for a parent to vent, just stay in the listening mode. It's not critical all the time to try to want to win. Sometimes you just listen, and if it's not a hill that you're ready to die on, then you just let it go. That is a part of emotional maturity that becomes important, and our children are watching. So you process your emotions with your peers and your professional. Go get the counseling. If you find yourself being frustrated, if you find yourself having difficulty in modeling the healthy emotions around the children, then sometimes you may want to talk to someone. But there are red flags. There are challenges that when you find yourself slipping in trying to demonstrate or model that emotional security. Now you are demonstrating sarcasm. Now you are saying things that's designed to set the other person off. Now you're doing things that you know that is going to cause the children to feel uncomfortable. But if it creates an opportunity for you to look fair or you to be on the upside, and then you find yourself from an emotional standpoint getting caught up in that. So I want to tell you that mind those red flags. But when you are co-parenting and when you're demonstrating effective emotional maturity, then even your children, right, they begin to sense it. They become more comfortable. They feel more loved, and they're able to sense that piece of love between the parents. So emotional maturity is absolutely critical in that process. So we had 4, but the 5th one, I think sometimes you may find yourself having to rely on, and that is that recognize that sometimes you may need to talk to someone else. Sometimes you may need to seek some support outside of you or your immediate family to help you navigate the potential conflicts or the conflicts that you may be experiencing with the custodial parent. So talk with someone in your circle or go get co-parenting counseling, or even try to convince the custodial parent to come with you to do some co-parenting counseling or negotiating around the differences that you all are having. So it's working when you're both open to feedback. You know that getting help outside is working when the conflicts are able to be resolved relatively quickly. Now we know that getting that help on the outside is helping you to manage some of the differences between you and reducing the conflicts, thus making you more effective as a co-parent. When you're doing this, then the relationship begins to improve, and over time, the child feels a great deal of peace being present, being in the presence of both of you. So I want to emphasize this. I think that the co-parenting process is effective. Co-parenting is something that you've got to learn to do. There's no such thing as parenting independent of the other parent. Now, sometimes people talk about parallel parenting where you have no contact with the other, but in reality, at some point, your parenting styles are going to have to converge. And so we have to be prepared in how we communicate. So co-parenting is not about perfection. No, it's about partnership. It's about keeping the child centered. It's about staying consistent in terms of how you all parent. And it's about growing as parents together, causing the child to feel far more comfortable in the presence of both of you and far more comfortable when they're in one home or the other. So these are my 5 components that I think are critical to effective co-parenting. I want you to try it. Just give it a try and just see if you began to see a difference in yourself, see if you began to see a difference in the child and a difference in the co-parent. My name is Dr. Gary O. White, and if you do that, we can toast to it.